This week on Eco Show, we'll be talking about whale feces. You heard that right. Not whale faces, whale feces. We'll be getting into that, and our research this week is going to be about satellites in space and thinking about the ecological consequences of putting all of that stuff up there, like in Wally. Okay. And our news this week will be talking about beavers. They're being reintroduced to places, particularly in the UK. San Francisco is looking to reuse more water in sustainable ways. And our last news topic that we'll be covering is that the EU has got a new soil monitoring law. All of that and more, not really, because those are all of the headlines, but that's what we'll be talking about today. Welcome to Eco Show. Hello and welcome to Eco Show. I'm Henry. I'm a PhD student in ecology, so you can trust everything that comes out of my mouth. And this is Eco Show, about a show about ecology, the environment, news, and things in that world of happening. We've got this will be on YouTube. This is on all podcast platforms, and we've got clips that we put up on TikTok and Instagram. So if you want to see cute little edits of this show, go and check out the Instagram and the TikTok. It's all Henry from Nature. And I'm thinking I'm going to start doing some a live show. So stay tuned for that. Okay, and this show, the way that we do it is we have a thing of the week. So we start by expanding our minds with a new thing in ecology that we're learning about each week. And then we talk about some research. So to expand our minds even further, learning about the bleeding edge of ecological research, and then we'll wrap up with news, which is tends to be kind of cuter things that have been happening. So our thing of the week this week is whale poop, and whale poop has a really big impact on the ecologies of oceans and is one of the big reasons why whales are considered to be ocean engineers, which just means that their activities in the ocean has an impact on the cycles of nutrients and carbon going on in the sea. So when they poop, they tend to release their poop as a liquid. There is whales do vomit up or poop out something called amber Jesus, I think it's called, which is not really the poop, but they get rid of a bit of stuff, and this poop can contain undigested body parts like squid beaks and hooks, like Captain Hook's hook or something. I think it was a crocodile actually that ate Captain Hook. It wasn't a whale. Noah. It could Noah and the whale. And and so this poo has a lot of good stuff in it. And the what's going on with it is that you may initially think that this poo is good or impact from whales because they are oftentimes eating along the surface of the water, and you think, okay, whales go dive down and they poo, so then the poo brings those nutrients from organisms at the top down to the bottom. But actually, whale poo tends to be pretty floaty, and they may poo lower down in the water column, but it floats up. And what it actually does is counteracts the downward flow of nutrients in the ocean. So, nutrients in the ocean in general, things are dying and they're sinking down to the floor. So, there's a downward flow of nutrients in general in the ocean. There are upwelling currents, but for the most part, there's a lot of things just constantly falling down. So when whales are eating things throughout the water column, they may be eating organisms that are in deeper water. You can think of like sperm whales that go down and eat squid and things like that. But they are actually counteracting that, and some studies have shown that the amount of nitrogen from whale poo is more than 3 times that which is coming into the ocean via the atmosphere. So they're big impact, and we have a photo here which is showing the whale pump is what this mechanism is called. And so we have got the marine mammals over there on the right. You can see them, the whales, when they go down to the deep, and their poo and their urea goes up. I'm not sure about their urea if that also floats up, but according to this image, that happens. But they'll be eating, and all of that stuff will float up, and those nutrients will help fuel phytoplankton, which will need that nitrogen and those nutrients to grow. They also have a bit of iron from eating krill, and krill are a fairly iron rich little sea organism that fish will eat, and so this whale poo will also be distributing iron throughout the water column. So this can sort of counteract some ideas of whales as being competitors for fish, and in fact, a lot of ways, whales are fueling fish populations because this whale poo will lead to increases of phytoplankton, which are eaten by smaller fish and bigger fish and bigger fish. So they are a big reason that there are fish, because they're fueling the whole food web with their poo. Let's see. This poo can also be used for conservation, and some research in 2012 used a sniffer dog to find orca feces. I couldn't find a video of this, but they had a dog on the boat that was somehow directing them to find orcas based on the smell of their feces, and they can test these feces for hormones and chemicals to understand the health of these populations. Some more interesting things on not necessarily whale but cetacean poo, which includes dolphins, is that there's research in 2003 in the South Atlantic that found that when dolphins would gather in a shallow inlet to rest during the daytime because they eat at night, there were fish that would gather in this inlet just waiting for these dolphins to poo and vomit. And the fish could tell when a dolphin was in the body position about ready to poo or vomit, and would chow down. So that's pretty funky, a little gnarly, and the researchers had to were out there snorkeling for hours at a time to observe this. So yeah, there's just some info on whale poo for you. It's an important thing to understand, and that's starting to, as whale populations are recovering, this is a process that is recovering, which is cool. Let's see. Okay, our research this week is about satellite pollution. And in general, satellites have been beneficial. They've allowed us to understand our world better, to communicate better, and to provide communications to isolated people and communities better. But there is a dramatic growth in the number of satellites that draws this into question. So this research from April is titled Environmental Impacts of Increasing Numbers of Artificial Space Objects by Kevin J. Gaston et al. And this was from the journal Frontiers in Ecology and the Environment, which is a journal I like. They've always got some interesting research. So there are many things to think about, to consider, and this is essentially what they're calling for in this research, is that we need to draw more consideration for what is the life cycle impact of satellites from start to finish. As it's getting easier and easier to put them up into the atmosphere, it's important to consider more closely what it is we're putting up there and why it is we're putting those things up there. So the obvious bits are the manufacture of these. They take up a lot of resource to produce these, will take up rare metals, their atmospheric consequences of launch. You're putting a lot of combustible things up into the atmosphere. And when your satellite is deorbiting, there's consideration to be put there, because when you have a satellite, it tend to be, the life cycle will be either put out into outer orbit or it'll be dropped down to get destroyed in the upper atmosphere. But when you have satellites, a large number of satellites being decommissioned into the lower atmosphere, you're introducing trace metals into the atmosphere, which can have an impact on the amount of light that's received from the sun. And there are important considerations to acknowledge there. And while satellites are up in the night sky, they are changing the way the night sky looks. So a lot of people live in cities and maybe don't see many stars to begin with in general now, but there are many species that will rely on the night sky and on fixed or moving stars in the night sky for navigation and life history cues. And when you have a huge introduction of satellites into the atmosphere that are designed to reflect light back to the earth, or sometimes you can see Starlink going across, a whole bunch of satellites going across the night sky. These can drastically impact the way that organisms are interacting with the night. Let's see. So since 1957, just a little background on the satellites in our atmosphere, there have been 6,300 launches and 15,000 satellites put into orbit. So that's since 1957, with Sputnik up in the atmosphere. And there are predictions that say 20,000 launches will happen this decade, with between 60 and 100 satellites, 60,000 and 100 satellites, 100,000 satellites being put into orbit. So a huge amount of satellites are being projected to be put up into the atmosphere compared to over the past 60 or 70 or so years. A lot of this is being put up there by privately owned corporations, and the impact on astronomical observation. So the ability for us to look into deep space will be very likely altered by this, and will increase the amount of debris in space, because you can have as good a plan as you want to decommission your satellite, but it's not always going to work, which could leave some debris up there in orbit. Okay, and we talked about the impact on confusing animals. Decommission can lead to congested airspace. So that's the issue with. So we talked about the one issue of sending it down and getting burnt up into the atmosphere, is that will introduce metals into the atmosphere, but the issue of sending it out further is more congested airspace. And this is ultimately a something that we're going to have to decide about the trade-offs in communications, navigation, surveillance, and monitoring of the Earth. So important thing to consider. Can't just keep shooting stuff up there as it starts to get built up. I do wonder how hard it would be to shoot it down if you wanted to get them out of the sky. Like if you could, if you were to shoot something to explode it, yeah, I don't know if that would make it. I don't think that would make it drop down. So I'm not sure the methods that are used to get them out of the sky, but this research is basically saying, hey, we haven't really thought about the ecological consequences of what a huge amount of satellites up in the atmosphere is going to do. But with the proliferation of doing it, we gotta start thinking about this. So that's our research. On to the news. We have got this. Our first thingy is that there is a soil monitoring law which is being rolled out in the EU, and they're acknowledging that soil is important for animals and for human production of things. They found, the EU Soil Observatory found that 60% of their soils are unhealthy, and this leads to soil organic carbon loss, loss of biodiversity, and peatland degradation, which is peatlands are old, kind of marshy type environments with lots of organic material in them. This law would hope to achieve healthy soils by 2050, and this is essentially a monitoring law. So it's going to require states to monitor soil health, fertilizer use, and erosion. The thing that was at least from my reading of this, is that it is just a monitoring law. So it's just requiring monitoring to happen, which is a good first step. You got to be able to monitor things to be able to do anything else. But it is kind of frustrating when they acknowledge that 60% of their soils are unhealthy, and having a monitoring law sometimes just feels like kind of a cop out to not really have to make a great big effort, because you're saying, okay, well, we're gonna start monitoring it instead of here's what some laws need to be in terms of how we take care of the soil, because you can monitor it all you want, but that's not gonna make any difference. But it's a good step anyways. Hopefully it just doesn't, blow money on monitoring, when it's like, you kind of know, if you're gonna, like if you have a gun and you're like, if you have a machine gun and you're shooting a machine gun at a, at a target, or at a, something that you'd shoot with a machine gun, maybe a barrel or something, you don't have to really look. If you're just blasting it, you don't have to monitor, oh, am I hitting anything? Like, you're shooting a machine gun. The issue should be focused on, okay, maybe I need to not shoot the machine gun, instead of like, oh, did my shooting in the machine gun impact the soil? You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, it's obvious that you're impacting the soil, so you need to stop shooting the gun. Anywho, that's that on that. We gotta, make some, and work with the farmers and folks, so that it's not just a added cost to do something that, if you're gonna ask people to invest time and effort, you gotta make it something that is worthwhile to do. Anywho, San Francisco next news piece, San Francisco is doing something with wastewater. So so some background on wastewater in general. So water from flushing in your sink and things like that. High income countries treat 70% of their wastewater before it's released into waterways or oceans, and 38 to 20% of wastewater um, is treated in sort of lower income countries, if treated at all. But, anyways, San Francisco is looking to have systems in basements in more of their buildings where wastewater can be collected, treated, and recycled back into the building. So like your gray water can be recycled and used back in toilets or things like that. This will hopefully save 1.3 million gallons of water daily, which is an important thing to be doing when you're in California, where you're very strapped for water. And many new buildings already have this in place. So they'll just be rolling this out more than they have already. They, and it was kind of gnarly, but they're saying in this article that a company has started brewing beer with gray water collected from a big San Francisco apartment building. I guess is a way to say that, hey, look how like this water is clean or something like that. But it's a pretty gnarly thing about drinking that. But if you think that's gnarly, a lot of places, treated water, so treated gray water from sewage and things like that, is in many places, after it's treated, is already pumped into groundwater and then retaken. So if you think this is gross, it's probably in a lot of places where you don't have a lot of natural water flowing, you may be already drinking gray water. So it's being tested, it should be good to go. It should be good to drink. But yeah, we're already drinking gray water. The circle of life, where all the water has been, it's like the thing with how they say like every dollar bill has some cocaine on it or something like that. Every drink of water has probably been out of urethra, through time. Every water molecule, probably, maybe, I don't know. There's a lot of water. I think there's so much water on Earth that I don't know if that somebody could do a back of the envelope calculation. How much do people pee as a species per year? And like, I wonder if we would have peed the amount of water that is on Earth. Maybe. Anywho, okay. Last piece of news. Beavers are being reintroduced to England. I've talked about another beaver reintroduction before, but so this is kind of similar, but they are reintroducing beavers into an area of England. And this will be the first time in this particular region, which I think was Northamptonshire or something like that. This will be the first time that they'll be in this region for 400 years. So they were made extinct 400 years ago, but they're being reintroduced. And some may think that beavers are a pest, but they're from there, They were there first, probably. They're really important because they make wetlands, which would be annoying for more mosquitoes, but these wetlands prevent soil erosion by when you have these dams that beavers are making, water is going to be moving more slowly through the environment, which means that you're going to have water being filtered more, so you're going to have improved water quality. When water isn't moving as fast, you won't have as much soil erosion, and it will retain more moisture and water across the landscape, which will be better for farming and will reduce drought. So it'll be really exciting to see what the impacts of this is going to be. This, when you've got degraded land without these sorts of little dams, these little natural dams, you will get water flooding across the landscape and things like this. So there can be a lot of benefits. These are being reintroduced over the winter of 2024 to 2025. So this winter, no, not this one, next winter. And they are going to be fenced in the habitat, and hunting of them will be banned. I imagine after a while, when populations get to a particular level, they will probably be allowed to be hunted to some degree again, but having them in a fenced in habitat will reduce the risk that they'll be negatively impacting nearby land and things like that. So pretty exciting to see all these reintroductions, and I'm sure it will be closely watched and monitored. And it's good knowing that it's an animal that was already there, so you don't have to be as worried about reintroducing a new animal and being unsure about the impacts of it. And if worst comes to worst, they made it extinct once, they can probably make it extinct again if it doesn't work out. Hopefully not, though. Hopefully those beavers are roaming free. And how cool would it be to think of an England with beavers? That's pretty awesome. Thinking about that, that's not an animal that I think of when I think of England. I think of, I guess, rabbits and cows probably for the most part, and cool birds. But it could be beavers. So very exciting stuff. And that is about it for this week. So I hope you have had a lovely week. I hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll catch you next time. Bye bye.